Too bright, too bright. Alright, I'm gonna fix some of this stuff here. Whoops. No. Yeah. There. Okay, hopefully that's better. I might have to readjust the lighting a bit. Yeah, this part is way too high. Sorry about that. I did not pre-stream prep very well. Okay, let's do this last bit here before we actually get started. Okay. Give that another minute and then we'll get started. Hello Toasty Alir, welcome to the stream. Just gonna finish setting up a couple things and then we'll get right on started. Get my notes. Bunch of notes. Not really. I don't. You know, the funny thing is, compared to like when I was doing the Bible reading streams, I had a lot of notes for those, and I would have like a whole like thing in front of me of all the notes I would have. Although I tend not to follow them half the time anyway. But I mean, the notes are just there to be like a guideline, so I'm not just talking my ass the whole time kind of thing. But here I'm just like no notes whatsoever. I just have a book here. So speaking of a book here, hello and welcome to the Streaming Parson Reads. Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales. Hope you guys are having a good Friday so far today, because today we got 2 more tales. Hopefully we won't go into crazy territory. But let's be real, we're reading the Franklin's Tale today, so we got a little bit of a wild ride. But before that, we are also reading the Squire's Tale today. So if you guys remember, the Squire, he's viewed as kind of like this idealist. So back in the introduction, we had Chaucer talk about like the knight and the squire, and they're kind of like the idealists of the group. I figure I'd bring this up now because it's been a while since we talked about the Squire. Because, you know, the knight, when we talked about the knight and him being an idealist, and then his story was like the first one we read. So it's kind of like, okay, you know, you get the kind of the, how do I put it, the setting the standard, if you will. Yeah, I will be here. Listen at work. Well, if you gotta be at work, you gotta be at work, right? I mean, don't go out of your way too much, because you know you gotta work, and try not to be distracted at work, kind of thing. Unless you got like audiobook mode, that'd be kind of sick. Because I know like a lot of people do that at work, even though like technically, it depends on what you do for work as well. I know with your job it's probably not that big a deal, but some jobs, you know, you can't be having like your audiobook playing. I can be pretty bad with that sometimes. I like to have my Lord of the Rings audiobook just play while I'm working. But then like the Lord of the Rings audiobooks are pretty great. Because they have like the sound effects too, and you just like get into it. And you're like, oh crap, I'm supposed to be working. But just how it be sometimes. Anyway, so the Squire is supposed to be the apprentice of the knight. And in a similar vein, he's also kind of like an idealist, you know, believing in like the nobility of man kind of thing. And the Squire being younger also has a little sense of naivete to him. And so, in a way, like, the naivete can have one view him as like, oh, you know, you don't know anything. You think the world is such a great place when it isn't. Especially when you're surrounded by all these other guys who tell these other tales that have, one, either like just lewd body jokes, or other people who are just extremely cynical. But after all these other like body and cynical tales that we've heard, let's see how the Squire tells his tale. Introduction to the Squire's Tale. Come over here, Squire, if you please, and tell us something about love. Surely you must know about it as much as any man. No, sir, he replied, but I'll do what I can with all my heart, for I don't want to go against your wishes. I will tell you a story, but if I tell it badly, I hope you'll excuse me. I'll do my best, and here's my tale. The Squire's Tale. At Sarev, in the land of Tartary, there dwelt a king who warred in Russia, and thereby many a brave man met his death. Cambuscan was the name of this noble king. Okay, let me make sure I pronounce that right. Cambuscan. Cambuscan is how we're going to pronounce it. Cambuscan was the name of this noble king. He was greatly renowned in his day, for nowhere by land or sea was there ever so excellent a lord in all respects. He lacked no quality a king should have. He kept his sworn allegiance to the faith in which he was born. In addition, he was powerful, rich, wise, merciful, and just always. Be true to his word. He was honorable, benevolent, indispositioned, steadfast as the pole, whatever that means, lively, young, and strong. In arms at mettlesome, at any knight in his knighthood. He was handsome, fortunate, and he lived in such royal splendor there was none to compare him with. This great king, Cambuscan, the Tartar, had 2 sons by his wife, Elfida. The eldest was named, oh my god, these names, Algarsif, and the other was Camballo. He also had a daughter named Canis, the easiest name here, the youngest of the 3. But I have neither tongue nor skill to tell you half of her beauty, nor would I dare undertake so high a task. In any case, my English is unequal to it. To describe her fully would require a great poet's skill in the rhetoric which belongs to that art, and none such as I can only speak as best as I may. It came about that when Cambuscan had worn his diadem for 20 years, he commanded, as I believe was his yearly custom, his birthday celebrations to be proclaimed throughout his city of Sarev for the exact day on which the Ides of March fell according on the calendar. TB dubs, the Ides of March is March 25th, which is hilarious you would pick that day. You know, it's kind of unfortunate. It's kind of funny where it's like, you're born on March 25th. I mean, there's only 265 days in the year, right? But you're born on March 25th, which is like, the last thing you want to associate it with is to say, like, it's also the same day as the Ides of March, of all things. So the Ides of March, for those of you who don't know, was a special, was a day where Julius Caesar was assassinated by the Senate. And everyone knows this day to be like a special day because of like the way it went about, where basically after Julius Caesar declared himself dictator, not long after, the Senate they conspired to kill him. And so one day Julius Caesar was just walking to he was going to work one day, I guess you could say, and 50 dudes just show up. These 50 guys just show up and they all just stab him a bunch of times, and then from that day that was referred to as the Ides of March, and the joke where any salad is a Caesar salad if you stab it enough times. So that's the Ides of March. And so for Cambuscan to be yeah, celebrate my birthday throughout the town the same day as the Ides of March, I'm like, dude, I would have picked something different to associate my birthday with. I mean, it's almost as bad where Fire Emblem has the same birth. It's like saying it's like celebrating Fire Emblem's birthday and then also saying it's the same birthday as Adolf Hitler. Oof. For reference, Fire Emblem was first released on April 20th of 1990. So, April 20, when you celebrate your birthday on April 20th, right? Everyone, no one gives a crap about your birthday. For them, it's the day to get high. Or celebrate Adolf Hitler's birthday. It's certainly not to celebrate yours. Hey Gauntlets, welcome to the stream. Or having your birthday on 9/11. That's another good example, right? If your birthday was on 9/11, and it's oh yeah, another great historical event the same day as your birthday. Oof, right? The death of thousands after the fall of the Twin Towers. Oof, bro. That sucks. Hey Gauntlets, welcome to the stream. It's going fine. Just having a laugh about awkward, sharing birthdays. But I mean, when you only have 365 or 366 days if you count the leap day. If you only have 366 days to work with, eventually someone's gonna share a birthday with some kind of bad event. But I wouldn't parade my birthday around with the Ides of March. Okay. Phoebus, the sun shone joyous and clear, for he was near his point of exaltation in the house of Mars, in the first 10 degrees of the hot and fiery sign of Aries. So, if you know your constellations, it's his birthday is on March 25th. The Aries would be the astrological time of what was it? Well, Cancer. No, not Cancer. No, Cancer's July. Going backwards, Gemini. Who's the one before? Oh, I'm forgetting here. I'm blanking. But basically, Aries would have been from just starting from March 22nd to April 22nd, and then there's one in April and so on. I don't remember my astrological horoscopes as well as I should. Pleasant and benign was the weather, so that the birds with the season of the year and the young greenery sang loudly of their loves in the bright sunshine, for it seems to them that they had won protection from the keen cold sword of winter. Now this Cambuscan, of whom I spoke, sat in his royal robes and diadem, high on the dais in his palace, holding high festival with a splendor and magnificence, such as the world has never seen. It would take a whole summer's day were I to describe all the spectacle. However, it isn't necessary to detail the order of the serving of the courses. I won't speak of their exotic soups, nor of their roasted swans and herons. That sounds pretty good, actually. For in any case, an old knight tells us, in that land there are some foods which are prized as great delicacies, but for which people care little of in this country. Roasted heron, though. It's gotta be good, right? Just think of duck. Roast duck, but even fancier. Hmm. Could use some duck with some plum sauce right now, though. No one could report at all. The morning is wearing on, so I shall not delay you. In any case, it would not be more than fruitless and a waste of time. So I'll go back to where I began. Now after the third course had been brought in, while the king was sitting in the midst of his nobles and listening to his minstrels playing delightful music before him at table, suddenly a knight riding upon a brazen horse burst in at the door of the hall. In his hand he carried a great mirror of glass, and on his thumb he wore a golden ring, while a naked sword hung from his side. So great was the astonishment at this knight that not a word was spoken as he rode up to the high table. It kind of sounds like Gawain and the Green Knight here. I'm just getting that kind of vibe. This strange knight, who had so suddenly made his appearance, was fully armed in rich armor, but bareheaded. He saluted first the king and queen, then all the nobles in order as they sat in the hall, with such deep respect and deference, both in words and bearing, that Sir Gawain, with his antique courtesy, could hardly improve on were he to come again from the land of Faery. Then in ringing, he delivered his message before the high table, not missing a thing out, according to the style fashionable in his language. In order to lend point to his meaning, he fitted his manner to his words, as the art of speaking directs those who study it. So linguists. And though I cannot imitate his style, which is far too high for me to climb, I can say over that what follows is the general gist of what he intended to convey, if I remember right. He said, "My liege lord king of Arabia and India proffers you his best salutations on this illustrious occasion. In honor of your festival, he sends you, through me, who am entirely yours, to command this horse of brass. Come rain or shine, it can take you in ease and comfort wherever you wish within the space of a natural day." That is to say 24 hours, and transport you bodily, without the least harm to yourself, through fair or foul, to any spot you have a mind to visit. I don't know why I changed voice mid-sentence there. I guess it's how the knight would sound, right? Or should you wish to fly into the air as high as a soaring eagle, so a flying mount, this same horse will carry you wherever you want to, even though you fall asleep on his back. And at the twirling of a pin, he'll return again. He that made it was skilled in machinery, and knew many magic seals and spells, and watched long for a favorable combination of the planets before he finished making it. Also, isn't that redundant, like a mirror of glass? Isn't it already glass? Yes, but poetry. But yes, you are right to point out that it is a little bit redundant. And this mirror, which I hold in my hand, is of such power that those who look in it can see when danger threatens your kingdom or yourself. It will reveal who is your friend and who is your foe. Over and above this, should any fair lady have set her heart on any kind of man, this mirror will show her his treachery if he be false, and also his new love, and all his guile so plainly that nothing shall be hidden. So the third eye diamond, that's what this thing is. Wherefore, against the coming of this pleasant summer season, he has sent this mirror and this ring that you see to your excellent daughter, my Lady Canis here. Should you wish to learn the power of the ring, it is this. If she cares to wear it upon her thumb, or carry it in her purse, there is no bird that flies under heaven, but she shall perfectly understand its song. and know its meaning plain and clear, and answer it again in its own speech. And she shall also know the properties of every herb that grows, and whom it will benefit, no matter how deep and wide his wounds. So basically she gets to learn every language, including the language of animals, and she just knows stuff. She's like a walking encyclopedia if you get this magic ring. You know how easy life would be if you could just do that? I wouldn't need to have Google open all the time. This naked sword that hangs by my side has power to cleave and bite through the armor of whatsoever man you strike, be it thick as a branching oak, and whosoever is wounded by the blow may never be healed until it pleases you out of compassion to stroke with the flat place where he has been hurt. That is to say, you must stroke the wound with the flat of the sword when it will close up. This is plain, unvarnished truth, and it will never fail while it remains in your possession. So a sword that just cuts, and then the sword is also a healing weapon. Having thus given this account, the knight rode out of the hall and dismounted. His horse stood stock still in the courtyard, gleaming like the sun. Then the knight was led to his chamber, unarmed, and taken to his seat at the banquet. He got in pretty easily there. The gifts that are the sword and the mirror, were immediately borne with royal pomp to the high tower by special officers appointed to the task, while the ring was ceremoniously brought to Canis, where she sat at the high table. But as for the horse of brass, and this is fact, not fable, it could not be shifted, but stood as if it was glued to the earth. None could budge it from its spot, even with the aid of windlass or pulley, for the simple reason they didn't know how it worked. So they had to leave it there until the knight showed them how to move it, as you will hear in a moment. Now a great crowd swarmed hither and thither to gaze upon the stationary horse, for it stood as high and was as broad and long, and as well proportioned for strength as any Lombard steed. More than that, it was so quick-eyed, and so much more what a horse should be, that it might have been a thoroughbred Apulian cruiser. Cruiser? I added an R at the beginning because I tried to make this word make sense. A cruiser. All agreed it was perfect from head to tail. That is, it plainly could not be improved by either art or nature. But still, their greatest wonder was how it could go. Being made of brass, it was magic, they thought. So a mechanical horse. That's what this thing is. And I think it's kind of more akin to a motorcycle. Since it would have... Or some kind of heavy metal, like, vehicle, but only with, like, it wouldn't be like a car. It's not that big. So I'm thinking like a motorcycle kind of thing. Because it's also, like, heavy. Like a motorcycle. Depends on the motorcycle, of course. Like your Harley Davidson would be kind of heavy. Thing weighs like at least 1,500 pounds. So it'd be pretty hard to just move that. Different people had their different notions. There were as many ideas as heads. They murmured like a swarm of bees, constructing theories according to their fancies. And they quoted the ancient poets and said it was like Pegasus, the flying horse, or perhaps the horse of Sinon, which brought Troy to destruction, as you may read in old romances. One said, "Fear keeps nibbling at my heart, for I feel certain that there are armed men inside who plan to overthrow the city. It would be best if such things were looked into." Another whispered quietly to a friend, "He's wrong. It's more like one of those magic illusion jugglers work at great banquets." Thus they argued, discussing their various misgivings, always ready to pull the worst construction on things as uneducated people generally do, when passing opinions on matters too subtle for their ignorance to comprehend. So some wondered how marvels could have been seen in the mirror which had been carried into the Master Tower. Another had the answer, saying it might well have some natural explanation, and work by means of a deft arrangement of angles and ingenuity contrived reflections. There was one like it in Rome, as he pointed out. Alhazen, Vitello, and Aristotle were mentioned. For as those who have read their books know, they wrote of their lifetimes of curious mirrors and the science of optics. Well, those guys think is all cap. Well, just as the Squire pointed out, this is like... I mean, we do this in the modern age as well, where people just like to throw theories about things that we don't have enough knowledge about, or even like... Think of like news stories, and before like all the information is revealed, and then people like throw out their theories about what the story actually is about, and they end up being wrong because they didn't bother to wait for all the facts. It's kind of one of it's like that. And I mean that's something that people in the Middle Ages especially do, and I mean it's still true today. Just different. It's just done differently. But you know, people gotta have their gossip and rumors about, you know, strange occurrences. That's kind of just how it is. Because when you, like, I mean, realistically, if you saw something, like, really strange that doesn't happen in your everyday occurrence, you would speculate about what it is and why it's happening. So, it's just human curiosity doing human curiosity things. Yet others marveled at the sword that could pierce everything. They began discussing King Telephus and Achilles' wonderful spear that could both wound and heal, just like the sword you have heard about. They debated the different methods of tempering metal, sometimes by the use of potions, and how and when the tempering should be done, all of which is a mystery, to me at any rate. Then they discussed Canis's ring. All agreed they had never heard of so wonderful a specimen of the ringmaker's craft, save that Moses and King Solomon were said to be skilled in this very art. Thus people talked, drawn aside in small groups. Some, nevertheless, pointed out it is remarkable that glass should be made from the ash of ferns, yet does not resemble fern ash. But because this has been known for so long, people have stopped talking and wondering about it. Many have speculated just as earnestly upon the cause of thunder, the ebb and flow of the tides, mist, gossamer, and all sorts of things, until the answers were known. So they chattered and argued and theorized till the king rose from the high table. Phoebus had left the 10th mansion at noon. The royal beast, the noble Leo, with the star Alderan between his paws, was still ascending, making it 2 hours past the meridian when the Tartar king Cambuscan rose from the table where he sat in state. Loud strains of music went before him till he came to the presence chamber, where various musical instruments played in celestial harmony. Now the worshippers of gay Venus began to dance, for their lady was in her exaltation in Pisces, and looked upon them with friendly eyes. When the noble king was seated on his throne, the strange knight was quickly brought to him. He led Canis to the dance. Here all was gaiety and revel, such as no dull dog may dream of. It would take a man acquainted with love and the service of love, some gay fellow as fresh as May, to picture to you the spectacle. Now who could describe their exotic style of dancing? Their beautiful faces, the subtle glances, the covering-ups, lest they be perceived by the jealous. No one but Lancelot, But Lancelot is dead. So I will pass over all the gaiety and say no more, but leave them to the revelry till it is time to dine. I'm going to just readjust my seating here for a second. Music plays. The steward bids them hurry with the wine and spices, which ushers and squires run off to fetch. They are soon brought in, when all eat and drink. And when this was at the end of the day, they proceeded to the temple, as was meet and proper. What need to describe what they had? Everyone knows perfectly well that a king's banquet has plenty for everyone, high and of low. Besides, more delicacies than I know of. When the dinner was over, the noble king, accompanied by his whole troop of lords and ladies, went to see the horse of brass. There was more amazement at this brazen horse than at the siege of Troy. So maybe it is a truck or something. Apparently, if it's being compared directly to the horse of Troy, then it must be pretty big, right? Because I mean, the Trojan horse had to be big enough to fit like a number of Greeks in it. Wasn't Lancelot like a dick or something? I mean, didn't he bang King Arthur's wife along with other people's wives? But that's besides the point. Yeah, he was kind of. I mean, if you're gonna measure his character by like that, then yeah, he is kind of a dick. Like a Hummer? That's very possible about the horse thing. Yeah, it's very possible. But yeah, Lancelot is kind of he's kind of a jerk like that. That he basically the whole idea with the Lancelot story is, you know, what makes a good knight? Loyalty or other like aspirational qualities. And so Lancelot is believed to be a good knight because of certain aspirational qualities, but it's revealed that he does falter in his loyalty to his king by essentially betraying him by, you know, banging his wife. So, but then of course Lancelot shows loyalty at the end of his story in the Fall of Camelot, where he returns to help King Arthur fight Mordred. So there's that weird like dynamic, right? And I mean that's the whole crazy thing if we were to go through Arthurian legend. That'd be a fun read in the future, but okay, where was I? Oh yes. Back to the horse. In the end, the king asked the knight about the strength and capabilities of the horse and begged him to explain how he was controlled. When the knight laid hand on the rein, the horse immediately began to frisk and curvet. "There's nothing to it, sire," he said. "When you wish to ride anywhere you want, twist a wire that's fixed inside its ear, which I'll show you when we are by ourselves. You must also tell him the name of the place or country to which you must also tell him, to which you wish to ride. Then, when you reach that place where you want to go, tell him to descend and twist another wire." See, when he's using the word like wires, it definitely sounds like, you know, it's like it's a machine. Because he's talking about like wires here. "For this is what works the whole mechanism. When he'll obey you and descend, he'll stand rooted to the spot, and no one on earth will be able to drag him away or carry him off. Or if you wish to bid him go away, twist this wire and he'll vanish from everyone's sight in an instant. But he'll return at any time, night or day, whenever you want to call him back. I'll show you how presently, when we're alone together. Ride him whenever you like. That's all you have to do." Dude talking like it's easy to drive, when you know damn well that driving is hard. Well, maybe maybe the horse is one of those like futuristic cars that like, you know, you ever hear like they have talk about like the self-driving car and using the like input your location, and the car will like drive there. Maybe it's one of those kind of things. Which, with that being said, if that was like what this this mechanical horse is supposed to be like, dude, these are people in the 11th century thinking like that advanced. We're in the 21st century. We haven't come up with that stuff yet. And here's some storyteller coming up with this idea. So, I mean, it's one thing to this, like, imagine something like this could exist. It's another thing to actually make something like this actually exist. Damn, we are lacking. Clearly! Having clearly grasped the principle of the thing when he had been instructed by the knight, the noble valiant Cambuscan returned delighted to his revels. The bridle was carried off to the tower and kept among his most precious and treasured jewels, while the horse vanished from sight. How? I don't know. And that's all you'll get from me. Now I'll leave Cambuscan feasting his nobles in merriment and delight till day was near dawned. Act 2. Sleep, nurse of the digestion. Give them a wink and a warning. Deep drinking and exercise call for rest. With yawning mouths he kissed them all, saying it was time to lie down, because it was the hour when the hot, moist humour of blood was in dominion. Look after your blood, for it is nature's friend, said the king. Yawning, they thanked him in twos and threes, and everyone began to retire to his rest as sleep has bidden, for they knew it was for their own good. Their dreams are not going to be related as far as I'm concerned, for their heads were full of the fumes of drink, which means they had no significance. Most of them slept late, except for Canis, and like most women she was very temperate, and had taken leave of her father to go to bed early in the evening. For Canis had no wish to appear looking pale and jaded in the morning. So she took her first sleep and then awoke. Damn, kissing the homies goodnight. Well, I mean, that was common practice in the ancient world. It was like to greet and say goodbye to people with kisses was just a sign of like closeness between people. Both the magic mirror and the ring had so delighted her heart that a dozen times her color came and went, and the mirror had made so deep an impression that she dreamed of it in her sleep. And so before the sun had stolen up into the sky, she called her duenna, that's how you say that, duenna to her side, and told her she wished to get up. The duenna, inquisitive as old women usually are, so a duenna is basically think of it like your closest attendant, like the attendant that's gonna. I was gonna say like your 24-hour, 7-day-a-week attendant, which I mean obviously is not 24/7, but you get the idea. It's the person who would, like your closest attendant, the one who like does most of your maid work for you. And inquisitive as old women usually are, answered at once. Where in the world can you want to go as early as this, madam, when everyone else is asleep? I wish to go up and go for a walk, as I don't want to sleep any longer. Her duenna summoned a large retinue of women, and some 10 or 12 of them arose. Then up rose Canis herself, as fair and fresh and rosy as the new risen sun, which by the time she was ready stood no higher than 4 degrees above the horizon. So it's like 5 a.m. Let's go with that. She went forth at a leisurely pace, lightly dressed as was in keeping with freedom in walking and the sweet and pleasant season of the year. With no more than 5 or 6 in her train, she followed an alley through the trees in the park. The mist rising from the ground made the sun appear huge and ruddy, yet the scene was so beautiful. It delighted their hearts. What with the early morning and the season of the year and the singing of the birds? For from their songs she had once understood what they meant and what their feelings were. Because remember, magic ring interprets animal language. If only I could do that, right, Mischief? If only... Sorry. If one delays coming to the point of a story till after the interest of those who have long been listening has cooled, the more it's spun out, the less savor is there in its proxy. And for this reason, it shows to me, it's high time I condescended to come to the point myself, and brought this walk of Cannes to an end. And as she sauntered idly along, she came upon a dried-out tree, white as chalk. And there, perched high, overheard it was a falcon crying out so piteously that the whole wood resounded with her lament. The birds, not Candace's. She had beaten herself so pitilessly with both wings that the red blood ran down from the tree to which she clung. And ever and again she shrieked and lamented, stabbing herself with her beak and wailing so loudly that no tiger nor other cruel beasts that dwelled in the woods would have wept if they could for pity of her. If only I were good at describing falcons, for no living man ever heard of one more beautiful in plumage, nobility in form, and all other attributes worthy of note. She seemed to be a peregrine falcon from some foreign land. Even every now and then she fainted on her perch for lack of blood, until she was at the point of falling from the tree. Bruh, that is me when I wake up in the morning. I can't change it. Well, yeah, that's most people. Name a person who, like, goes to the bathroom and looks at themselves in the mirror and immediately thinks, like, you're gonna immediately take over the world, you know, and have, like, the most upbeat, chipper attitude. Most people are not like that. Most people will be like, I don't want to get up in the morning. That's most people. As the lovely Princess Candace was wearing upon her finger the magic ring that enabled her to understand perfectly the language of every bird and to answer it in its own tongue, she could understand what the falcon was saying, and for the pity of it almost dropped down dead. She hastened to the tree, looking pityingly, that's a tough one to say, super fast, at the falcon. She spread out her lap, for it was clear to her the falcon must fall from her twig, when next she fainted for loss of blood. Bird engage. She stood watching her a long time, till at last she thus addressed the hawk. What is the cause, if it may be told, of you being in this fierce torment of hell? She said to the hawk, It is for grief at death or loss of love. For these are two things, as I believe, that cause most grief in a noble heart. Other misfortunes are not worth mentioning, for you are inflicting punishment upon yourself, which clearly proves either bitterness or despair must be the occasion of your cruel agony, since I see no one hunting you. I pray you take pity on yourself, for God's love, or say, how can I help you? Nowhere in the world have I ever seen a bird or beast maltreat itself so pitifully. I feel such compassion for you that truly your grief is killing me. For God's love come down from the tree, and I am the true daughter of a king. When I know the real cause of your sorrow, I'll put it right before the day is over, if it lies within my power. As surely as the great God of nature may give me aid, and I'll find plenty of herbs that will quickly heal your wounds. Then the falcon shrieked even more piteously than before, and suddenly fell to the ground in a dead faint, where she lay like a stone. Candace took her into her lap until she began to regain consciousness, and when the falcon had recovered from her swoon, she said something like this in hawk language. I mean, it's implied, because the whole thing is that Candace is speaking in bird language. So you don't have to say that the bird is speaking in its own language. That pity quickly flows in noble hearts, which feel the sharp pang of another's like their own. It proved every day, as one may see in both books and real life, for a noble heart declares its nobility. My fair Candace, I can plainly see you have compassion on my distress, because of the truly womanly kind-heartedness that nature implanted into your character. With no hope of bettering my condition, but only to obey your generous heart, and to let others take warning from my case, as a lion is daunted when a dog is beaten in front of it. For that reason, and to that end, I'll tell you my troubles before I go, while I have the time and opportunity. Imagine you are there to watch a girl and a bird squeaking to each other. Well, I've seen crazier, I'm sure. And ever, while the one told her sorrow, the other wept as if she could turn to water, till the falcon bade her cease, and with a sigh began her story as such. I was born, alack the day, in a rock of grey marble, and fostered so tenderly that nothing troubled me, and I didn't know the meaning of adversity till I was able to soar high under the heavens. Close by me there dwelt a Tircel, who seemed a very fountain of nobility, though he was filled with perfidiousness and treachery. It was shrouded under a modest demeanor. Perfidiousness means like, how do I define this word well? It means like you're clearly like plotting something. You ever heard the phrase the cat that ate the canary? You know, when you walk up to someone and you ask them a question, you know they're gonna give you like a really like dirty answer kind of thing, because you know they kind of they plot about doing that to people and trolling you kind of thing. That's what that means. A color of honesty, an eager attentiveness and desire to please, and this in such a way that none could have guessed it was all pretense. So deep ingrained that he dyed these colors, just as snakes hide themselves under flowers, biding its time to strike. And so did this hypocrite, this paragon of lovers, pay his gallant courtesies and deferential homage, keeping up an appearance of the attentiveness that goes with a noble love. And as a sepulchre is beautiful above, while you know that underneath there is a rotting corpse, so was this hypocrite, a warm outside, but cold within. And he pursued his end in such a way that none, unless it were the devil himself, knew what he intended. He wept and complained for a long time, and for so many years pretended his service to me, believing in his oaths and promises, my too tender and too foolish heart, all innocent of his consummate wickedness. Granted him love on the condition that my honor and good name would always be kept inviolate, both in public and private. In other words, as he seemed worthy, I gave him my whole heart and soul. Else, God knows, and he knows, I would never have given them, and I exchanged my heart for his for all eternity. But there's a true old saying, an honest man and a thief never think alike. So, when he saw that things had gone so far, and that I'd wholly granted him my love in the way I've described, and yield him my faithful heart as freely as he swore this, this tiger fell upon his knees with such humble devotion and deep reverence in aspect and behavior, so much the noble lover, so ravished it seemed for joy, that never Jason nor Trojan's Jason did I say? Surely no man since Lamech, who, as it has been written, was first to love two women. Never since the first man was born, could anyone imitate a 20,000th part of his skill in deceits and sophistications, or have been worthy to unlatch his shoe where double dealing and pretense are concerned. Or so thank a creature as he thanked me. No woman, however prudent, could resist his heavenly graces. So exquisitely groomed and polished was he in both conversation and demeanor. So basically your typical pickup artist in a club. That's what this bird is describing. And I so loved him for his deference and the honesty I thought was in his heart, that if the slightest thing gave him pain and I knew of it, I seemed to feel death ring at my heart. For in short, things went so far that my will became the instrument of his. I mean that in everything, within the bounds of decorum, and in my honor, my will obeyed his will. Oh, God knows, I never had anything so dear as he nor ever shall. My imagining nothing but good of him lasted for a year or two, or maybe longer. But in the end, this is how things stood. Fortune willed it that he must depart from the place where I lived. No question, but that it was grief to me. I cannot begin to describe it. But one thing I will say, for certain, it taught me what the pain of death is like. I felt such torment at him having to go. So one day he took leave of me, and so sorrowfully, that when I heard him speak, and saw how changed was his color, I really suppose he felt as much pains as I did. However, I thought he was faithful, and that he would indeed return again with a little while. And there were also reasons of honor, as so often happens, for his going, so that I made a virtue of necessity, and took it well. Hiding my sorrow from him as best as I could, I took him by the hand and swore by St. John, "See, I am wholly yours. Be you to me, and I have been and ever shall be to you." There's no need to repent what he said in reply. Who could speak better than he, or behave worse? He speak with eloquence, and do nothing. Whoever sups with the devil has need of a long spoon, or so I've heard. So at last he had set out and flew whither he wished to go, and when he decided to halt, I imagine he had in mind his adage. Everything rejoices at returning to its natural bent, or so I believe. Men have a natural love of novelty, just like birds. One feeds in cages, for you can look after them night and day, strewing their cages with straw as soft and fine as silk, giving them sugar, honey, milk, and bread. Yet such is their love of novelty and diet. The moment the door is open, they'll kick over the cup with their feet and be off to the wood to feed on worms. They have a natural love for anything new, and no nobility of blood can restrain them. So it was with this Tircel. Alas the day! Nobly born, lively, gay, handsome, modest, and generous, one day he saw a kite upon the wing, and suddenly fell so deeply in love with her, that all his love for me was clean gone. And in this way he broke his troth, and so my love became the servant of this kite, and I am forsaken with no remedy. God, milk and bread sounds good about right now. It sure does. Definitely the sweet sugary kind. You know, like, you think of like those like, kind of like, I wouldn't say they're like glazed, but they obviously put like some kind of, what are they, like, what is the actual baking term for it? But like, when they put like a kind of layer of sugar on like a croissant, dude, that and milk is just like amazing. That's just like the comfort food right there. And with these words, the falcon gave a cry and fainted in Canis's bosom. Well, not the powder, but sometimes they make like sometimes they'll add powder on top of that. But just like on a croissant, they just kind of put like a little glaze on it. I mean, you can add the powder to it as well, but sometimes the powder gets a little messy when you're eating it. When you just have like the glaze on the croissant, oh, that's so good. Basically, like glazed croissant is what I'm talking about. But like, yeah, like once again, you can add the powder. Like, oh man, I'm getting off topic here, but there's this place near my house, and they do like various like cinnamon buns kind of thing. I know it's not the same thing, but like they do like all the different kind of powders. You get like a strawberry powder on a cinnamon bun, and I was just like, oh, strawberry and cinnamon, like it's a pretty interesting combo. But I did not think that would work. But when I had it, I was like, it's good. But the problem with like the problem with the powder is that like it gets a little messy as you eat it. Oh, pan dulce is just so good. You know what? And this is where like I know I'm getting off topic here, but man, something I just feel bad for is where like when people have like their gluten intolerance. When they have their gluten intolerance, I feel so bad. I feel so bad for people who have gluten intolerance because that means you can't enjoy stuff like pan dulce. Or pan dulce. Sorry, I should pronounce it correctly. With pan dulce. You can't have pan dulce if you're gluten intolerant. You know how sad that is? Like, it's just one of those things to be reminded of how grateful when you don't have like allergies and stuff. How grateful you should be for not like for being able to eat anything. Because I feel bad for people who cannot eat pan dulce. I really do. It sucks because like, dude, pan dulce is so good. Okay, well you gotta feel bad for people you gotta feel bad for people who can't eat that. Because I've met a number of people that like can't have gluten, so they can't eat that, and it's just so sad. They are, and it's not their fault that they're missing out. It's like it just sucks that they can't eat that, and that's you gotta feel bad for them. And with these words, the falcon gave a cry and fainted again in Canis's bosom. Great was the sorrow of Canis and all her women for the hawk's misfortune. Hold up, how do the other women know what's being said? See, Canis has a magic ring, but what about these other women? Do they just take context clues? That, oh, Canis is crying, therefore we gotta cry? I don't know. They did not know how they might comfort her. But Canis brought her home in her lap, and gently bound her in plasters where she hurt herself with her beak. All Canis could do now was dig the ground for medicinal plants, and make new salves from rare and brightly colored herbs to heal the hawk. She bruised herself with all her might, night and morning. At the head of her bed she made a new mew for her hawk, covering it with blue velvet. Blue strands for the fidelity that is found in women, painting it green on the outside, with pictures of all faithless birds, such as titmice, turtlets, owls, while beside them, for scorn, were painted magpies, scolding and crying out upon them. So I leave Canis nursing her hawk, and for the present I'll say no more about her ring, till the time comes to relate how the falcon won back her lover, repentant according to the story. Through the meditation of the king's son Camballo, of whom I told you, from henceforth my story shall tell of adventures and battles, and greater marvels than have ever been heard. First I'll tell about Cambuscan, who captured so many cities in his time. Then I'll explain how Algarsife won Theodora for his bride. For he was many times in peril for his life for her, had he not been helped by the horse of brass. And after that I'll speak of another Camballo, who fought in the list with the two brothers of Canis before he could win her. Now I'll begin again where I left off. The Squire's tale breaks off here, for Chaucer never bothered finishing it. And that is actually what it says. I don't know if you can see that, but yeah, it says, nope, tale's over. Chaucer did not bother writing the rest. I guess because the Squire was going to end up telling too many stories, and Chaucer probably lost interest. Not the first time this happened, but it is kind of funny that oh god, this is only Act 3 of Act 12. I'm not writing this all down. So yeah, apparently if you read other scholarly works about the Canterbury Tales, because this book by this edition, I can't remember who wrote this edition. Who put this edition together? A dude named David Wright. So David Wright put together this version, and then of course this version was around the 70s. When did David Wright make this version? I think he made this version I think it's the 70s. 1965. So even before then, this current version was a republish in 1972. But there have been manuscripts of the Canterbury Tales that have been found since then. And it was believed that this story that the Squire is telling actually has 12 parts. We only read 2 of them, and damn, 2 parts was pretty long already. But I guess Chaucer, David Wright was making a point that Chaucer probably didn't want to bother. There was just too many parts, because the tale is based on this 12-part epic. But I guess Chaucer couldn't be bothered, and so when they recovered more manuscripts of the Canterbury Tales, this part was never bothered to be completed because it was probably too long. And once again, back in the ancient world, but this is before imagine you have to hear all these stories, and you don't have a tape recorder. Even a tape recorder would have been sufficient, but you don't have anything to wow. I made myself sound so old referring to a tape recorder, but you don't have something to record all these stories with. If he has to go off this, he has to remember a lot of these stories. He has to go off memory for a lot of them. And so some of these stories that may end up really long, like the Squire's Tale, maybe Chaucer just didn't remember. We don't actually know why he didn't bother finishing the script. One, it could just be that the script was too long. He ran out of paper. We don't know whether he just forgot the rest of the story. We don't actually know. But it's just kind of funny that, Act 2 ends, and then the Squire's Tale breaks off here. Chaucer never finished it. But the funny thing is, the next part of the book, we assume all 12 parts have been played. And now we get some follow-up with the Franklin and the Squire. Upon my word, Squire, you've acquitted yourself honorably, and well, I compliment you on your talents, the talents of which we never see, said the Franklin. considering your youth, you speak with so much feeling, I can only applaud. If you keep on, in my judgment, none here will equal your eloquence. God grant you luck, and may your powers continue to develop. I take the greatest delight in your conversation. I have a son, and by Trinity, I'd rather he were a man of discrimination like yourself, than the 20 pounds worth of land, though you were to give it to me on the spot. What's the use of possessions if a man has no abilities? Fair. I've rated my own son often enough, and shall again, because he has no taste for such accomplishments. All he does is play dice and throw money around, and lose everything he has. And he'd rather talk to a servant lad than converse with some gentleman, from whom he could learn true good breeding. A fig for your good breeding, cried our host. What's all this, Franklin? Sir, for heaven's sake, you know perfectly well that each of you must tell at least a tale or two, or break his promise. Oh, I'm quite aware of that, sir, replied the Franklin. But please, don't think the worse of me if I have a word or two with this young man. The average gotcha player? You could very well be. Not another word, but get on with your story. Ah, gladly, master host, he replied. I'll bow to your will. So listen to what I shall tell. So far as my wits may serve, I'll not oppose you in any way. I pray to God it may please you, for if it does, I'll know it's good enough. The Franklin's Prologue. In their time, those noble old Bretons used to make lays from all kinds of adventures, versified in the original Breton tongue. They either sang these ballads to the accompaniment of musical instruments, or read them for their own pleasure. I have one in mind which I shall willingly relate as best as I can. But, gentlemen, as I am a simple fellow, before I begin, I must first beg you to excuse my homely style. To be sure, I've never studied the art of rhetoric, so what I may say be bare and plain. I never slept on the Parnassian mountain, nor studied Marcus Tullius. Make no mistake, I know nothing of rhetorical devices for colorful language. The only colors I know are those which grow in the fields, for those which people dye or paint with. The colors of rhetoric are too difficult for me. Now my heart has no feeling for that kind of thing. But if you wish, you shall hear my tale. I like this little subnote that David Wright puts here. He goes, this is actually an ironic disclaimer. The tale which follows is in fact full of rhetorical devices, which Chaucer seems to be gently guying, as in the long speech by Dorigen towards the end of the story. So basically the Franklin's just full of shit. But hey, I mean, the Franklin works in a farm. He's probably dealt with loads of crap, so it just makes sense he'd be full of crap himself, right? Is that how that works? I don't know. I'm not a Franklin myself, so I wouldn't know. No. The Franklin's Tale. In Armorica, as Brittany was called, there was a knight who loved a lady, so another knight loving a lady. He served her in the best of his ability, and before winning her, performed many a labour, and many a great understanding. For she was the fairest of women under the sun. There's no way I'm going to keep that voice the whole time. Moreover, she came of a family so exalted, that the knight scarcely dared reveal to her his grief and pain and longing. But in the end, because of his worth, and especially his humble attentiveness, she took pity on his suffering and tenacity. She tacitly consented to take him for her husband and master. Such mastery as men have over their wives. And in order to live the more happily life together, he voluntarily swore upon his knighthood, so that long as he lived, he would never exercise his authority against her will, nor exhibit jealousy, but obey her and follow her wishes in all things, as any lover ought to with his lady. But for the honor of his status as husband, he would appear to be the master. So she thanked him, saying with great humility, Sir, since in your magnanimity you offer me so free a rein, God forbid there shall ever be strife or discord between the two of us through my fault. And here I give you, sir, my word of honor. I shall be your true and humble wife till I die. So they lived together in peace and tranquility. The end. No, I'm just kidding. For gentlemen, there is one thing I must safely assert. Lovers who wish to live together for any length of time must submit to one another. Love will not be constrained by mastery. For when mastery appears, then the god of love claps his wings, and presto, he's gone. Love is a thing as free as any spirit. Women by their nature desire liberty, not to be constrained like bond slaves. And if I'm not mistaken, so do men. In love, whoever is the most patient has the advantage. For patience is surely a sovereign virtue. For according to the scholars, it conquers where severity achieves nothing. You cannot scold or grumble at every harsh word. You must learn forbearance, or you will have to learn it. I swear, whether you will or not, for surely there is nobody in the world who does not behave badly on occasion. Anger, illness, and influence of the stars, wine, grief, or a change of mood very often make one act or speak amiss. You cannot take revenge for every wrong. Everyone who knows how to govern himself must exercise restraint according to circumstances. And therefore, that they might live in harmony, this wise and worthy knight promised forbearance. While she promised him most faithfully that in her there should be never any fault to be found. What a weird way of wording that, but Middle English, am I right? To be fined? No one talks like that anymore. Here one may see a modest and sensible bargain. Thus did she take her servant and master. In love, her servant, her master, in marriage. And so, he was both master and servant. No, not servant, but in mastership above, since he had both his lady and his love. For she was his lady, certainly, but his wife also, and this is in accordance with the law of love. Having attained this felicity, he went home with his wife to his own land, not far from Penmarch Point, where his dwelling was, and there he lived in happiness and delight. Who but a married man could tell the joy, the ease, and the comfort that is between husband and wife? This happy state lasted a year or more, till this knight of whom I speak, his name was Averagus of Carod. That's how you say that. Averagus of Carod. So we're going to call him Averagus from now on, because I'm not going to read that whole title the whole time, every time. He made up his mind, and lived for a year or two in England, which was also called Britain, to seek honor and renown in deeds of arms, for his whole heart was set upon such feats, and there, so the book says, he dwelt for 2 years. So, 2 years later. It took a whole paragraph to just say 2 years later. Poets, am I right? Now I will leave talking about Averagus, and tell of his wife Dorigen, who loved her husband with all her heart. She wept and sighed for his absence, as noble wives do when they feel like it. She mourned and watched and wailed, fasted and lamented, and was so tormented by longing for his presence that nothing in the whole wide world meant anything to her. Realizing her sorrowful mood, her friends comforted her in every way they might. They exhorted her day and night, saying she was killing herself for no reason. They busied themselves giving every possible consolation in the circumstances to make her leave of her melancholy. As you all know, if you carve away at a stone long enough, in the course of time, some image will be impressed on it. They comforted her so long that with the help of hope and common sense, she received the imprint of their consolation, and thus her great sorrow began to assuage. She could not have endured so violent a grief forever. And besides, in all this unhappiness, Avaragus sent home letters to her saying he was well and would quickly return. Otherwise, this sorrow must have broken her heart. Seeing her grief begin to abate, her friends knelt down and begged for her heaven's sake to go walking with them to drive away her gloomy thoughts. And finally, she granted their petition, plainly seeing it was for the best. Now, her castle stood hard by the sea. To amuse herself, she often walked with her friends upon the cliff above, where she saw many ships and barges sailing on their courses wherever they wished to go. But this became part of her grief, for often and often she would say to herself, alas, is there no ship of all the many I will see my husband home? For then my heart would be quite cured of its bitter pangs. At other times she would sit there and think, casting her eyes downward from the edge of the cliff. But when she saw the black forbidding rocks, her heart would quake from sheer terror, till she could hardly keep upon her feet. Then she would sit down on the grass, gaze sadly upon the sea, and say with many a sorrowful and heavy sigh, Eternal God, that though thy providence guidest the world with sure control. Oh no, she's speaking in like Shakespearean English now, which is weird because Shakespeare was long after this, but whatever. It is said that thou hast made nothing in vain. But Lord, these fiendish black forbidding rocks that seem rather the work of a foul chaos than any fair creation of a God so perfect, wise and unchanging. Why hast thou made so irrational a creation? For neither man nor bird nor beast is benefited by them in any quarter of the world. They do no good that I know of, nothing but harm. Do you not see how mankind is destroyed by them? For rocks have slain the bodies of 100,000 men, unremembered though they may be. Yet mankind is so fair a part of thy creation that thou hast madest in it thine own image. Then it seems as if thou hast granted great love towards mankind. So how can it be that thou fashionest such means to destroy it? Things that do no good, nothing but harm. I know well enough the scholars will say what they like and prove by logic that all is for the best, even though I cannot understand the reasons. May God who made the wind to blow preserve my husband, for that's my conclusion. I'll leave all the disdain I'll leave all the disdaining to scholars. But would to God that all those grim rocks were sunk in hell for his sake. Those rocks kill my heart with fear. Thus would she speak, weeping sadly. Now her friends, seeing it was no pleasure for her to wander by the sea, but rather a distress, determined to find amusement elsewhere. They led her to rivers and springs and other delightful places, where they danced and played chess and backgammon. I guess those things would have been around in the 11th century. They are simpler board games. One fine morning, they went to a nearby garden where they had made arrangements for a provision of food and other necessaries, and there diverted themselves the long-lived day. It was the 6th morning of May, and the month had painted the garden with its gentle showers and filled it with leaf and blossom. Skillful hands had so exquisitely arrayed this garden that there was never another of such beauty, unless indeed it were paradise itself. So full it was of beauty and delight that the scent of the flowers and sight of their brilliant hues would have lightened any heart that ever lived, unless burdened into a too great sickness or too heavy sorrow. After dinner, they began to dance and sing, save only Dorigen, who kept sighing and lamenting. For among the dancers she might not epsy him who was to her husband and lover both. Nevertheless, she had to stay on for a while and let her grief allay with hopping. So basically, she is not the, what's the word I'm thinking of? She's not the oh no, why is the term slipping from my mind? Life of the party. That's what I was thinking of. She's not, definitely, Dorigen is not the life of the party. Let's just say that. Among others at this dance, there danced a squire before Dorigen. He was, to my thinking, more spirited and gaily apparelled than the month of May. He danced and sang better than any man that ever was since the beginning of the world. To give some idea of what he was like, he was one of the most gifted of living men, besides youth, strength, talented, rich, intelligent, popular, and well thought of. In short, if I'm not mistaken, it so happened that for over 2 years this gallant squire, a servant to Venus, Aurelius was his name, had loved Dorigen more than any other living creature, wholly without her knowledge, but had never dared to tell her of his grief. He suffered inward torment beyond measure. He was in desperation, afraid to say anything, though he used to reveal something of his passion in his songs. For example, in a general complaint that he loved and was not loved in return. Round this theme he composed many a song, lyrics, complaints, rondels, lays, and verilets. Now he dared not tell his grief, but suffered torments like one of the furies in hell. Oh, he must die, said he, as echo for Narcissus, who feared to tell her woe. This was the only way in which he ventured to disclose his grief to her, except, perhaps, sometimes at dances, where the young people are courting. It may well be that he gazed upon her face, like one who asked for mercy. But she was unaware of what he meant. Nevertheless, before they left the garden, it chanced, for he was her neighbor, a man of honor and repute, and she had known him for a long time, that they fell into conversation, and little by little Aurelius steered toward his purpose. And when he saw his opportunity, he said, Madam, by that God that made this world, had I been sure that it might have made you happy, I wish on the day your Averagus crossed the sea. I, Aurelius, had gone whence I should never return. For I well know that my devotion is in vain, and my reward no more than a broken heart. O madam, have pity on my cruel sufferings. For with one word you may either slay or save me. Would to God I were buried here at your feet. There is no time to say more. Have mercy, love, or you will make me die. So she turned it and stared at Aurelius. Do you really mean what you said? Before this I never suspected what you meant. But now, Aurelius, that I know of your intentions, I swear by the God who gave me life and soul, that so far as in me lies, I'll never be an unfaithful wife, either in word or deed. I mean to be his to whom I am wedded. Take that for my final answer. But afterwards, she said banteringly, Lord in heaven, Aurelius, since I see you lament so pitifully, I would consent to be your love on the day you remove all the rocks, stone by stone, from one end of Britain to the other, till they no longer hinder the passage of any boat or ship. This I say, when you have cleared the coast so free of rocks that no stone is to be seen. Then I will love you more than any other man. I give you my word, so far as I can promise anything, for I know it can never happen. Let these foolish notions slip from your heart. What satisfaction could anyone find in loving the wife of another, who can possess her whenever he pleases? Aurelius sighed heavily. Is that all the mercy you can offer? Yes, by the Lord that made me, she answered. Hearing this, Aurelius was stricken with grief, and with sad heart replied, Madam, that would be an impossibility. It means I must now die a miserable death. And with that, he turned away. I guess points the door again for not immediately falling to, like, these, cuckolds. Like all these other, like, dudes in these other stories all getting cucked. Oh, my neck's a little sore here. Anyway. Then a crowd came of her friends, wandering up and down the garden walks, quite unaware of what had just taken place, for they at once renewed their merrymaking. This went on until the bright sun lost its color, having been robbed of its light by the horizon. That's as much as to say night had fallen. When, with the sole exception of poor Aurelius, they went home happy and contented. Now Aurelius returned to his house with his heart heavy, for he saw no way of avoiding death. He seemed to feel his heart grow cold. Raising his hands to heaven, he fell down upon his face, and in a frenzy began a prayer. He was out of his wits with sheer grief, and did not know what he said. But thus he spoke, when he was with his breaking heart, he began his lament to the gods, and to the sun in special. O Apollo, Lord and Governor of every plant, herb, tree, and flower, you who give, according to your distance from the celestial equator, to each its time and its season, as your lodging in the ecliptic altars from high to low. Lord Phoebus, cast your merciful eye on miserable Aurelius, who is all but lost. Behold, Lord, for no fault of mine, my lady has vowed my death. I don't know about that first part there. Unless in your magnanimity you take some pity on my dying heart. For I know well Lord Phoebus, that if you will that if you will, you can help me, my best of all. Save only my lady. Vouchsafe that I may tell you how I can be helped, and in what manner. Your blessed sister, bright Lucina, queen and paramount goddess of the sea, though Neptune be its god, yet she is empress over him. Lord, you well know that just as she desires to be lit and kindled at your fire, and therefore follows you eagerly, just so does the sea, by nature, desire to follow her. For she is a goddess not only of the sea, but of all rivers, great and small. Therefore, Lord Phoebus, this is my request. Oh, perform this miracle, or let my heart break. That when next the sun is in the sign of Leo, so August, I guess. Poseidon whipped. I guess. No, sorry, I lost track there. So, yeah, Leo would be like August. And at the height of his power, in opposition to the moon, you pray her to bring a tide so high it will rise at least 5 fathoms above the tallest rock. In Amorican, Brittany, and let this tide continue for 2 years. Then I may safely say to my lady, the rocks have gone, now keep your word. Lord Phoebus, perform this miracle for me. Beseech the moon to keep pace with you so as long as you go on your course. Beseech your sister, I say, for 2 years to go no faster in her course than yours. Then she shall always be uniformly at the full, and at the spring tide shall continue day and night. Oh, get a little sleepy here. Gotta see where I was. Okay. But if she will not vouchsafe to grant me my dear sovereign lady in this way, then beseech her to sink every rock into her own dark underground region where Pluto dwells. Else I shall never win my lady. Barefoot I'll take a pilgrimage to your temple in Delphi. Lord Phoebus, see the tears streaming down my cheeks, and take some pity on my pain. Saying this, he fell down in a swoon, and lay for a long time in an unbroken trance. Just gotta pause for a moment. I don't know why, I'm feeling like a little bit sore here. And it's like really like getting in the way. It's really distracting. And of course it's like, oh, now it's catching up to me that like, it's already like what, 4:30? So, I'm getting a little bit tired, but we'll make it through, guys. We'll make it through. Ooh, ah, ooh, ah. Yeah, shoulder hurts for some reason though. Just stretch a little bit, I guess. Do the hourly posture check. Also, I noticed why you are telling the story. You figure is in the background. Also, you worded the first part weird. Also, I noticed while you were telling the story, your figures in the background. Yeah, my quintessential quintuplets. I actually have more of them, but I don't have enough space in the background. I have more of them. Because I obviously have one of each sister, but I'm kind of gonna stop for a while. We'll see if there's any really good anime figures in at some point. There's actually a hobby store not too far from my house, that I could check out. Only thing that sucks about it is that like it's rough for like hobby stores in this town, but it's in like a very weird location. It's like it's next to a bypass, and so there are some like shady people around there as well. So like the store itself has had like trouble. It's got like when I first entered the store, it already has like a board of like banned people, like people that are not allowed to enter the store at all because like probably obvious shoplifters. And so it's rough for this hobby store, but I did see some pretty cool stuff there. I got one of my I actually got like one of them from there, and then another place is a manga store in like a big mall there. There's a manga store in like the one of the big malls in the city I live in, Metro Town as it's called, the mall, and the store is called Sakura Media. It started out as like just a manga store, but obviously more money is in like the merchandising than manga, so that's where I got like I got these ones, my Nino and Ichika ones here. I've gotten like a few of them from there. I have well, I don't know what would be the next anime I'd be really looking for other than like the quintessential quintuplets. I mean, maybe when My Dress Up Darling gets another season, hopefully there'll be My Dress Up. I mean, that was a tough one to come by because like Kitagawa Marin from My Dress Up Darling is like super popular, so there have been no models in America for Marin because like any of them that are ever made, they just get sold immediately. So yeah, that I mean, if you want the better models, you have to get them online anyway. So there's like a few I want to check out online, but dude, man, it's like, oh, it's so expensive. to get things shipped from Japan to Canada is so expensive. I don't like thinking about it. Because there was one of like Xenoblade Chronicles I saw for Xenoblade Chronicles 3 that I saw, but even though the price in Japan is like roughly like 50 American, is like 70 Canadian or whatever. Once it gets here and it goes to like Canada Post and other like Canadian tax things, it will turn a $70 model to like $120. It's ridiculous. Canadian tax is so bad. I know I shouldn't be saying that like publicly like this. I know someone's gonna give me shit for it later, but nah, Canadian taxes are such a pain in the ass, man. So that's why like that's the other thing too that sucks about like buying models online, because Canadian taxes are just like I don't know how bad, like in the States there's still taxes, but I don't know how bad it is in the States, but in Canada it's like really bad. Like I said, Canadian taxes and going through Canada Post will turn a $70 purchase to a $120 purchase. That's like a 70% increase. Like it's awful. I'm not gonna pay an extra 70% just because Canadian taxes. What a dick move. It sucks. So yeah, that's all I have to say. Anyway. Okay. Ooh. Just had to take a breather there because like I was getting a little bit mentally exhausted. So, a little bit of a mental break. Now we can go finish the story now. Your blessed... Oh, sorry. I passed that part. Where was I? Oh, yes. Okay. Lord Phoebus, perform this miracle for me. Beseech the moon to keep pace with you as you go on your course. Oh, beseech your sister, I say, for 2 years to go no faster in her course than you. That she shall always be uniformly at the full, and the springtide shall continue night and day. But if she will not vouchsafe to grant me my my dear sovereign lady in this way, then beseech her to sink every rock into her own dark underground region where Pluto dwells. Else I shall never win my lady. Barefoot I'll make my pilgrimage to your temple in Delphi. O Lord Phoebus, see the tears streaming down my cheeks, and take some pity on my pain. I went back so I could start reading from this part. Saying this, he fell down in a swoon, and lay in a long time in an unbroken trance. Now Aurelius's brother, who knew of his misery, picked him up and carried him to bed. I shall leave the unhappy creature lying there in this desperate torment and distress of mind. He can live or die as he chooses, for all I care. Now Averagus, the flower of chivalry, returned home with other distinguished knights, prosperous and covered with honors. Now Dorigen is in the 7th heaven, her valiant husband in her arms, her bold knight and worthy warrior who loves her dearer than life itself. He was not in the least given to suspicious imaginings as to whether anybody had spoken of love to her while he was away. Of that he had no fear. Instead, he danced, jousted, and made merry with her. So I leave them living in happiness and delight, and return to sick Aurelius. Doing good so far. I like to think so, Gauntlets. I did have to have that little mental break, because, story gets kind of long. So you need to, reset yourself, and then keep reading. The wretched Aurelius lay ill in furious torment for 2 years, and more before he was able to set foot upon the ground. During this time, his only comfort was his brother, a scholar who knew all of his trouble and grief. For you may be sure he dared not breathe a word about the matter to any living soul. He hid in his bosom more secretly than Pamphilus did with his love for Galatea. Onward his breast appeared unwounded, but the sharp arrow remained in his heart. And in surgery, as you well know, the cure of a wound healed only on the surface is hazardous, unless one can reach the arrow or get at it. In secret, Aurelius's brother wept and lamented, till at last he had recalled that, when he was at Orleans in France, seeking knowledge of out-of-the-way sciences in every nook and cranny, being eager like any other young student to read the occult arts, he remembered seeing one day in his studies at Orleans a book of white magic, which a friend of his, although there to learn another profession at the time, had privately hidden in his desk. This book had a good deal of information touching the workings of 28 mansions of the moon, and nonsense like that which isn't worth a fly nowadays, for the faith of Holy Church and our creed will not allow us to be harmed by such chimeras. And when he remembered this book, his heart danced with joy, and he said quietly to himself, "Ah, my brother will shortly be cured, for I'm sure there are arts by which various illustrations can be produced, like those created by expert magicians. For I've often heard tell that at banquets these magicians can make water and a barge appear and row up and down the great hall. Sometimes a fierce lion has seemed to come, sometimes flowers blossoming as if in a meadow, sometimes a vine with grapes white and red, sometimes a castle built all of stone and lime. They made them instantly vanish whenever they pleased, or so it seemed to all men's eyes. So I've come to the conclusion that if I can find at Orleans some old friend who has these mansions, of the moon stored away in his head. So are some other white magic besides. He might well make my brother have his love. For by means of some illusion, a magician could make it appear to human eyes that every one of the black rocks of Brittany had been removed, that ships were coming and going along the coast, and he could keep up the illusion for a week. Then my brother would be cured of his grief, for she would have had to keep her word, or at least be put to shame. So why make a long story of it? So he went to his brother's bed, and so warmly urged him to go to Orleans, that he immediately arose, and was soon on his way there, hoping to be released from his misery. When they had almost come to the city, they were within 2 or 3 furlongs of it. They met a young scholar strolling by himself, who greeted them politely in Latin, and then astonished them by remarking, "I know why you've come." Before they had gone a step further, he told them all they had in mind to do. The Breton scholar asked another friend he had known in the old days, but the other replied that they were dead. At least he was shedding many tears about it. Then Aurelius alighted from his horse and went home with the magician to his house, where they made themselves comfortable, for there was no lack of delicious food. Aurelius had never seen a house so well appointed in all his life. Before they went in to supper, the magician showed him forests and parks filled with wild deer, and there he saw harts with towering antlers. Hart, H-A-R-T-S, as in a male buck, by the way. Or I guess bucks are male deer, but a hart is another word for a buck, basically. Male buck. I can't believe I just said that, because that's implied in the word buck, that it's male. A doe is a female deer, if you wanted the female equivalent. Anyway, a hart is also another word for a buck. He saw hounds slay 100 of them, while many others bled from cruel arrows' wounds. And when these wild deer were done away with, he saw upon the banks of river falconers whose hawks had just killed a heron. Then he saw knights jousting on a plain, which after the magician delighted him by showing him his lady in the midst of a dance in which it seemed he was himself taking part. When the master who had made this magic saw it was time, he clapped both hands together, and lo! The whole show vanished. Yet they had never once left the house while they were watching this marvelous spectacle, but sat quietly in the study where he kept his books, with no other person there except for the 3 of them. Yeah, this magician is that good, I guess. The astrologer called his squire and said, "Is our meal ready? I declare it's almost an hour since I told you to prepare our supper, when these gentlemen come with me into the study where my books are." "Sir, it's ready whenever you please," said the squire, "even should you wish it to be served at once." "Then let us go up and sup." "I think that would be best. People who are in love must sometimes have refreshment." Yes, magic. After supper, they fell to bargaining about the amount of the fee the astrologer should be paid for removing all the rocks of Brittany from the Gironde to the mountain. From the Gironde to the mouth of the Seine. He held off at first, swearing he'd not take less than £1,000. That is a lot of money. God help him, nor was he too eager to do it for that sum. But Aurelius, whose heart was bursting with happiness, soon replied, "A fig for £1,000! Were I lord of it, I'd give the wide world which they say is round. The bargain's struck, and we're agreed. You'll be paid in full, on my word of honor. £1,000 though. So for reference, I guess a pound is roughly like. Well, a pound's value changes, but to recent memory, I think the pound, the current British pound anyway, is roughly like 2 3/4, like 275 US, something like that. It's a lot of money. I mean, for £1,000, you just put the decimal 3 places, right? So what's that? $2,750, give or take. US. That's a lot of money for like a magic show. I mean, I guess if it's for Aurelius to get laid, I guess it might be worth that much money. But damn, that's a lot of money this magician is asking for. $2,700 US dollars for one magic trick. That's a lot for the time. Oh yeah, that's even more so for the time, right? Because, I mean, on a side story kind of thing, I'll tell as a funny joke. So, I was at work and we were talking about numbers and crap, and I don't know, we were just talking about it for some reason, and my supervisor mentioned that the number 0 and infinity do not exist. Of course, the 0 part I largely disagree. The number 0 always existed in history. Linguistically, we just never used that word 0. Because you never saw like a shepherd in ancient Israel say, I've encountered 0 wolves today. Nobody talks like that. But the idea of like nothing existed. Because, you know, there could be like no wolves. That's a nothing. So the number 0 did exist. Of course, the number 0 as we know it was a later invention. Well, not later, but like it's still an ancient world thing. But compared to like ancient Egypt and like Middle Eastern nations, India came up with the number 0 a lot later. Roughly, I think it's roughly 1000 BC. That Indians came up with the number 0. And the reason why they did that was not because of Russell Peters' joke about Indians being so cheap that they don't want to pay anything. But the actual reason for inventing the number 0 was for mathematical purposes. And because of this, India was very advanced in engineering in the ancient world. If you actually look up like Indian archaeology, ancient India was very technologically advanced compared to, like, once again, ancient Egypt, and even to like compared to the Greeks. And the Greeks came after the invention of the number 0 in India. So even like compared to the Greeks, who were a lot later, in ancient India was very technologically advanced because they were able to make mathematical calculations that a lot of other cultures couldn't do, because they had the number 0 to do it with. Whereas a lot of other cultures don't have that number. And you might be thinking, well, what about the number 10? It's in like the number 10, which has a 1 and a 0. Well, that's not how numbers were in the ancient world. The number 10 was a different number. And then if you think like Japanese or Chinese or like any East Asian number systems, they would do something weird. Like they would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then they would go 10-1, 10-2, 10-3, 10-4, 10-5. And then when you get to 20, it's 2-10. So 2-10-1, 2-10-2. And that was their way of doing numbers, because 10 was its own number. And then so you think of like Roman numerals. Roman numerals as well. It would go like 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the V is 5. And then V, I. And then you get IV. Or sorry, IX. And then X was 10. Right? So, but Indians came up with the number 0. Anyway, that's a weird side story. It had nothing to do with anything. Now, on the other end, well, first of all, infinity isn't a number. And I kind of agree that, like, okay, infinity isn't actually a thing, because we live in a finite universe. So therefore, everything has a finite value of some kind. But the way we use the concept of infinity in the number system is a placeholder before we get to bigger numbers. And now we're going, okay, so back then, as you were mentioning, Alir, that the like 2,700 US dollars would have been a lot of money. It's almost an absurd amount of money in like 11th century Britain. That kind of money would have been absurd amounts of money. You're talking like you're talking like money people would never see in like a given lifetime. It's kind of like how in modern equivalents would be like, you and I will not see like $1 billion in our lifetime. Like all the money you make in your entire life, you will not see $1 billion. That's just how it is. And so yeah, there is a huge difference between you and a billionaire, because a billionaire has already made money you will never see in your life. And so the number infinity is kind of like a placeholder. And so I was thinking of, if you ever watched Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me, so Austin Powers 2, and this joke I always refer to when I talk about like the concept of infinity, is that infinity is a placeholder of a number that we haven't gotten to yet. So there's this one joke in Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me, where Dr. Evil, he develops his moon laser, the parody of the Moonraker, right? And he threatens the American government, and he's like, I have the laser, and if you don't want me to fire my laser, you will answer to my demands. And so the U.S. government's like, okay, what are your demands? And Dr. Evil's like, I want $10 billion. And the American government looks so confused. And then his son starts laughing at him and goes, you idiot. This is the 1960s. That kind of money doesn't exist. Because it didn't. I mean, even now, like, we talk about, like, the concept of trillions of dollars, which is already an absurd thing, because once again, you will never see $1 billion in your life. Probably. Most people never will. Let alone talking about, like, something that's 1,000 times more than that. So like $1 trillion is just like a ludicrous idea of like money, that kind of money existing. But the concept of infinity placeholds, well, what happens after trillions of dollars? What if we get to the quadrillions of dollars? Which definitely won't even happen in our lifetime. Like, that's such an absurd number. But thinking of like how ancient money would have been, and comparing money, like currencies like now and back then, right? With the 11th century. Yeah, you're right. Like £1,000 is an absurd amount of money. That's money that the average person would never see. So once again, this magician asking for that kind of money casually for a single magic trick, it's gotta sound ludicrous. It's almost like Dr. Evil asking for $10 billion in the 1960s. So just for some like comparison, I guess, for how much this magician is asking for, it is a ridiculous number. Because I mean, okay, now in 2023, like £1,000 doesn't seem like that much. I mean, it's still a lot of money. That's still like that's like 2 months pay if you're working minimum wage. That's roughly 2 months pay. A little bit less, but $2,700 is still quite a bit of money. And especially just to throw around like this. Like, imagine if you had to, like, pay for, like, a concert. And pay, like, several $1,000s. Like, you know, there's that whole thing about, like, paying for engagement rings. And engagement rings going for, like, 3 months, your 3 months salary. Which would be, like, typically, let's say, like, not minimum wage, but like slightly better than minimum wage. That would still be like $5,000 for like an engagement ring if it's 3 months salary, which is a lot of money. You know, $5,000 is a lot of money, and so I mean, even in comparison, like if we were to pay $2,700 for this guy's magic trick, that's still a lot of money. But it's not as ludicrous as like Chaucer's audience would have heard. Like, what, this guy's asking for £1,000? That's money. That's money I could never see in my lifetime. Let alone like for one magic trick. Are you out of your mind? You could work. I could work my whole life and never see £1,000. It's probably what the average person here is thinking. But Aurelius, whose heart was bursting with happiness, soon replied, "A fig for £1,000? Were I lord of it, I'd give the wide world, which they said is round." See, they did not think the earth was flat even back then, contrary to popular belief. The bargain struck, and we're agreed. You'd be paid in full. On my word of honor. Excuse me, to stretch my nose. But see to it that you don't delay us here later than tomorrow, through any slackness or negligence. "Oh no," said the astrologer. "I pledge you my word." Aurelius went to bed when he felt like it, and slept almost the whole night. What with his tiring day and hope of happiness, his sad heart found relief from suffering. At daylight next morning, Aurelius and the magician took the shortest route to Brittany and alighted at their destination. This was, so the books remind me, in the cold and frosty season of December. Phoebus had grown old and copper-colored, who had earlier in his burning summer solstice shone like burnished gold in glittering rays. But now, being descended into Capricorn, I dare say he shone palely enough. In every garden, bitter frost had destroyed the greenery with sleet and rain. Now, double-bearded Janus sat by the fire, drinking wine and his great ox-horn. The flesh and tusked boars stand in front of him, and every stout fellow cries, "Noel." Okay, yeah. You're almost at this point where you know the story's just like playing on tropes here. Yeah, the magician's name is Janus, right? The typical mage name, right? Oh yes, he's a magician and his name is Janus. Just like every witch's name in Morgana. And every anime cute girl is Akane. So of course his name is Janus, right? Aurelius made his astrologer feel an honored and welcome guest in every way he could, and then begged him to do his utmost to deliver him from his cruel agony, or he cut his heart open with a sword. That skilled astrologer so pitied the fellow he made all possible haste. Night and day he watched for a favorable hour for his astrological experiment. That is to say, producing by some conjuration, I don't know the proper astrological terminology, some illusion by which Dorigen and everyone else would think and say that the rocks of Brittany had disappeared or sunk underground. And at last he found the right time for the performance of his wretched, diabolical mumbo-jumbo. And yes, I did not write that down. That's actually what's here. The words mumbo-jumbo. He brought out his newly corrected Toledan, tables of astronomy, and everything he needed. Tables for the motions of the planets for round periods, and tables for subdivisions of periods and longitudes for given dates to furnish bases for calculation. And all other paraphernalia. I know how to pronounce words. Such as his centers and angles and calculations, and his tables of proportionals for computing planetary movements. Computing. That's a word that probably was reinterpreted for modern writers, because there's no way the word computing was a real word back then. So that he can make all of his equations. By the motion of the eighth sphere, he knew exactly how far Elnath had moved from the first point of the sign Aries overhead, which is deemed to be in the ninth sphere. All this, the exact amount of the precession of the equinoxes, he had expertly calculated. See, this is where the whole thing Chaucer's calling out to Franklin for non-eloquent wording. It's like, dude, you just talked about this guy's, like, magic trick and his whole, like, process of setting up, like, planetary symbols and stuff. It's like, dude, this is the most technical shit you could have ever said. The average person would not know any of this. Having found the moon's first mansion, he was able to compute the rest of proportionality, and tell when the moon would rise and in what relation to the planets and their places in the zodiac, and all the rest of it. He knew exactly which mansion of the moon was appropriate for his experiment. Also, all other ritual ceremonies necessary for such illusions and other evil practices employed by heathen folk in those days. Therefore he delayed no longer, and by means of his magic for a week or two it seemed as if all the rocks had disappeared. Aurelius, still on tetherhooks, whether he was going to win in his love or miss his chance, waited for his miracle night and day. And when he realized that all obstacles had gone and all the rocks had vanished, he fell at the astrologer's feet and said, "Oh, I, the sorrowful, wretched Aurelius, thank you, Master, and my Lady Venus, who has helped me out of my grievous troubles." And he made his way to the temple where he knew he would see his lady. Then seeing his chance, forthwith he greeted his beloved sovereign lady with humble demeanor and a tremulous heart. Yeah, explain that, flat earthers. Actually, the just a little bit of trivia, but the whole belief in the dark ages of the world being flat. Now, many people attribute it to, like, oh, Christians thought the world was flat, which, okay, that was partly true. But the reason why, not just Christians, but most people during the Dark Ages thought the world was flat, was because it was actually a misinterpretation of another thing that the ancient world used to believe. That guy was like speaking in English, dude. Not everyone is understanding you. Yeah, that's how it is with most poetry. But the belief of where the flat earth idea comes from, actually, people did not think the earth was flat. It was actually an interpretation of another incorrect belief that people had in the ancient world. And to be fair, everybody had this belief. It wasn't just like everybody makes fun of Christians about this idea, but lots of people thought this. It wasn't just Christians who thought this. Because once again, until people sent rockets into outer space, nobody could actually prove this. So the belief was that people used to believe the earth was the center of the universe. And so if the earth was the center of the universe, that means everything else had to move around it. If everything else moved around it, then the way that we perceived the world, everything had to be literal. That was kind of where that interpretation comes in. And so this is where, like, once again, we still use this kind of language, but when you say, like, the sun rises, now we know the sun doesn't actually rise. We know that the earth spins. But if you were under the notion, if you're under the preconceived idea that the earth was the center of the universe and thus everything else moved and the earth didn't, then if the sun literally rose, then how does it rise and then set? And so the transient of logic that ended up leading to, like, the idea that the earth was flat much later was that, well, if the sun and the moon rise and set, that's because, well, then it actually goes up and then it goes down and then it goes like the sun and moon go somewhere else. And so perhaps the reason why it does that is because the earth is a very in its stationary position, must then only have one dimension, which if you say something has one or two dimensions, then it's flat. And so that's where that belief comes from. But of course, as you know, people understood science, the earth spins. And so since then the earth spins like everything else, then there are larger forces at play. And this is where, like, you know, you have, like, Isaac Newton understanding the law of gravity. And that's actually where he understands the law of gravity. There's that whole misbelief about how, like, Isaac Newton discovered gravity by having an apple fall on his head. That's actually not true. He understood how gravity actually works when he saw an apple fall in front of him. And so the idea that, like, basically what Isaac Newton came to understand was that there are forces at play that play larger than reality as we see it. And so gravity functions as one of these such forces. That it operates in this unseen realm. And of course, the most ironic thing about this is that Isaac Newton had to appeal to religion to help his idea. The idea of an unseen higher plane of existence. And gravity operates on a higher plane of existence. Which is a wild idea. But of course, once again, modern science has kind of like downplayed the need of a higher plane of existence for gravity to function. But that's besides the point. The point is that like the ancient world did not understand how what gravity and how it worked, and so the conception of like the Earth being the center of everything and everything else just moves around it as like place marks, then that's where the idea of flat Earth actually came from. But once again, once gravity was better understood, there's kind of no way to argue for flat Earth, because the fundamentals of gravity says that there's no way that would work. But ironically, if you still believe that like the Earth is in the center of the universe, which once again, unless you're one of those people that do, then there's no way you could see that the Earth being flat. On a funny bit of other trivia, in the Marvel movies, the Marvel movie writers must have been aware of this and knew how to make a good joke out of this. And I remember there used to be like people would make like internet troll topics and Reddit posts about this. But in Thor Ragnarok, when you see like Asgard from like a spaceship's perspective, Asgard's on a flat plane. So what, Asgard, the world of Asgard is flat? Or sorry, not Asgard. So Asgard is flat. But of course, it would make sense for Asgard to be perceived that way, because Asgard is believed to be the center of the 9 realms. So once again, it's that philosophy that the ancient world used to have. If you're in the center of the universe, then your world is flat and everything else revolves around it. And so in Thor Ragnarok, Asgard is flat. Which is kind of hilarious, because that would be consistent with old world thinking as well as Asgardian lore. That Asgard was the center of the 9 realms. Well, technically Yggdrasil was, but Asgard is the keeper of Yggdrasil, and Yggdrasil, part of Yggdrasil, sits in Asgard. Or let's put it this way. It's kind of hard to explain this because it's explaining mythology, right? So, since Yggdrasil technically stretches on for infinity, what happens is there's a part of like the base of Yggdrasil. There's a gateway to the base of Yggdrasil. That's the way of wording it. There's a gateway to the base of Yggdrasil in Asgard. And the reason why that's the case is because Asgard is believed to be the center of the 9 realms. And so, of course, the connection to Yggdrasil would be in Asgard. And so the gateway to Yggdrasil is in Asgard. Of course, Yggdrasil bleeds out in other parts of the 9 realms as well, because all the 9 realms exist within Yggdrasil. So naturally, that's how that would work. And so, since Asgard is the center of the 9 realms, then Asgard would be flat. At least if you followed the old world belief of how if you were the center of the universe, your world would be flat. So that is actually a little bit of funny trivia about like, actually the Thor movie. I don't know if they intentionally did that. If they did, that's genius. if they did that intentionally and knowing that, that's actually genius in my mind. And that's a really smart way of understanding like all kinds of different like mythologies and lore and philosophies. Because of course one thing that comic books do is that they try to synchronize every like philosophy and religion into like a cohesive single universe. That's how like Zeus and Odin can exist in the same world and even fight each other or have contests with each other, like in Marvel with Hercules and Thor and their eternal rivalry. So if that was part of like if the MCU did that intentionally by making Asgard flat, I think that's pretty genius. Anyway, side note over. I should finish this reading soon and end this stream soon. Now, Aurelius heads to the temple. That's where I am now. Alright, Aurelius, still on tenterhooks, whether he was going to win his love or miss his chance, waited for his miracle night and day. And when he realized that all obstacles had gone and all the rocks had vanished, he fell at the astrologer's feet and said, I, the sorrowful, wretched Aurelius, thank you, Master and my Lady Venus, who have helped me out of my grievous troubles. And he made his way to the temple he knew his lady would be. Then seeing his chance, forthwith he greeted his beloved sovereign lady with humble demeanor and tremulous heart. My own true lady, whom with all my heart I most dread and love more than whom there is no one in the whole world, I am reluctant to displease. Were it not that I suffer such distress for you, that I am on the point of dying at your feet here and now, nothing would induce me to reveal to you how oppressed with misery I am. But the truth is, I must either speak or die. For no fault of mine you are killing me with the most utter torment. But even if you have no pity on my death, reflect a moment before you break your pledged word. By that God that reigns in high, think better of it before you kill me because I love you. For, madam, you know well that it is that you have promised. Not that I claim anything as of right from you, my lady, except your consent. But in that spot in yonder garden, well you know what you promised me. In my hand you pledge your word to love me best. God is witness you said so, unworthy though I be of your love. Madam, I am now speaking more for the sake of your honor than to save my heart's life. I don't know about that one. I have done as you commanded, as you will see in your vouchsafe, to go and look. Do as you like. Remember your promise. For dead or alive, you will find me here. It lies entirely with you whether I live or die. But this I know, the rocks are gone. So Aurelius took his leave, while she stood there dumbstruck, without a drop of blood in her cheeks. She had never thought to fall into such a trap. Alas, that ever this should happen, she cried, for I never dreamed there was any possibility of such a monstrous prodigy or marvel. It is against the course of nature. As she went home, an unhappy woman, so dismayed she was hardly able to walk. For the whole of the next day or two she wept and lamented, often fainting away. It was pitiful to see. But she told no one the reason, for Arviragus had gone out of town. With a pale face and dejected countenance she communed with herself, and in this manner made her lament. Alas, cried she, it is against you, Fortune, I make my complaint. You who have entangled me unawares in your chain, from which I know nothing that can help me escape save only death or dishonor. One of these two I am forced to choose, but nonetheless I would rather lose my life than dishonor my body, know myself unfaithful, or lose my good name. And surely by my death I may be freed from this dilemma. Have not, alas, many honorable wives and virgins slain themselves rather than transgress with their bodies? Indeed they have, and lo, these stories bear witness. When the 30 tyrants, their hearts filled with iniquity, had slain Phaedon at a banquet in Athens, they ordered his daughters to be arrested, who, to gratify their filthy pleasures, they maliciously commanded to be brought stark naked before them, where they made them dance upon the pavement in their father's blood. O God's curse on them! And so, according to the books, these terrified unhappy virgins slipped away and leapt into a well where they drown themselves rather than lose their maidenheads. And the people of Messene also inquired and sought out 50 Lacedaemonian virgins. Lacedaemonian, that's a real word. Lacedaemonian virgins, meaning to satisfy their lust upon them. Yet there was not one of the whole band but killed themselves, willingly choosing to die rather to consent to be robbed of their virginity. Why then should I fear to die? Consider again the tyrant Aristocles, who loved a virgin called Strimphilus. When her father was slain one night, she ran straight to the temple of Diana and clasped the statue with both hands, and from this statue she would not go. Nobody could wrest her hands from it till she was killed on that very spot. Now if virgins have such abhorrence of being sullied by a man's filthy pleasure, how much more, it seems to me, ought a wife to choose to slay herself rather than be defiled. And what shall I say of Hasdrubal's wife, who took her own life at Carthage? For when she saw the Romans had won the city, she took all her children and leapt into a fire, choosing to die rather than let any Roman violate her. Did not poor Lucrezia kill herself in Rome after she had been raped by Tarquin, because she thought it shameful to go on living when she had lost her honor? And the 7 virgins of Miletus slew themselves in grief and despair, rather than suffering the Gauls to rape them. I suppose I could relate 1,000 stories touching this theme. For example, after Abradates had killed his beloved wife, after Abradates had been killed, there's no comma here, that's weird. His beloved wife slew herself, and her blood flowed into his gaping wounds, crying, "At least no man is going to pollute my body if I can help it." Where should I rehearse any more instances when so many have killed themselves rather than be violated? All things considered, it is better I should slay myself than be thus defiled. I'll be true to Averagus. Man, this name, Averagus. I'll be true to Averagus, or else kill myself in some way, as did Domitian's beloved daughter, because she didn't want to be deflowered. Oscidasus, how piteous it is to read how your poor daughters died, who slew themselves for a like reason. It was as piteous, if not more so, than when the Theban virgin killed herself on accident on Nicanor, when she was in the same kind of trouble. And another Theban virgin did exactly the same thing, because a Macedonian had raped her, and with her death redeemed her lost maidenhead. And all that, and what shall I say of Niceratus's wife, who made away with herself in like circumstance? How true also was Alcibiades' love, who chose to die rather than suffer his body to remain unburied. Think what a wife Alcestis was. What does Homer say of the good Penelope? All Greece knows of her chastity. Of Laodamia, indeed, it is written that when Protesilaus, man, so many of these tough Greek names, of Troy was slain, she refused to live a day beyond his death. I don't know about that one. I can tell a similar story of the noble Portia, who could not live without Brutus, to whom she had given her whole heart. And the perfect fidelity of Artemisia is honored throughout barbarian lands. And as for you, Queen Teuta, your wifely chastity may serve as a mirror for all wives. I can say the same of Bilia, of Rhodigune, and of Valeria. And thus for a day or two, Dorigen lamented, all the while making up her mind to die. However, on the third evening, the worthy knight Averagus came home and asked her why she was weeping so bitterly. At this she wept even more. Alas, she cried, I wish I had never been born. I have said, no, I have promised. And she told them all just as you have heard, and there's no need to repeat it again. But it was with a serene countenance and friendly tones that the husband answered, as I shall relate. Is there anything else, Dorigen? No, no, she cried, as God is indeed my help, and it is and it is too much, even if it be God's will. Ah, wife, let sleeping dogs lie. Perhaps all may yet be well. You shall keep your word, I swear it. For as I hope for heaven, so great is the love I bear you, I had rather be stabbed to death than for you to fail to keep your promise. Nothing is more sacred than keeping of one's word. But saying this, he burst out weeping, then cried, While life and death is in you, I forbid you on pain of death ever to tell anyone of this affair. I will endure my grief as best as I can, and do not look sad, lest people guess or suspect that something is wrong. Then he summoned a squire and a maidservant. Go with Dorigen, he said, and take her at once to wherever place she wishes to go. They took their leave and set out, but without knowing why she was going there. He did not wish to tell anyone what was in his mind. Now many of you, perhaps, will surely think him a fool to put his wife in jeopardy like this. But listen to the story before you cry out upon her. She may have better luck than you think. Judge for yourselves when you've heard the tale. Now Aurelius, the squire so much in love with Dorigen, happened by chance to meet her right in the middle of the busiest street of the town, as she was preparing to go straight to the garden where she had given her promise. And he also was going to the garden, for he kept a good watch and knew when she left her house to go anywhere. Ugh, like a stalker. But thus it was that they met, whether by chance or providence. He greeted her gladly and asked where she was going. And she replied, almost as if crazed, To the garden as my husband bade me, to keep my promise, alas, alas. At this Aurelius began to wonder, and in his heart felt great compassion for her and for her sorrow, as well as for Averagus, the noble knight who had bidden her fulfill her promise, because he could not endure that his wife should break her word. And this so touched his heart, that taking everything into consideration, he thought it best rather to deny himself his pleasure than commit so mean and wretched an act in the face of such generous magnanimity. So he said briefly, Madam, tell your husband Averagus that having seen this great magnanimity toward you, having seen your distress also, and knowing he would prefer to be shamed, which would be a thousand pities, rather than you should break your pledged word to me in this way. I would far sooner suffer eternal torment than break up the love between you two. Madam, I remit into your hands every pledge and bond you have ever made me since the day you were born. I give you my word, I shall never reproach you with any promise. And here I take my leave, the best and truest woman that I ever knew in my whole life. But let all women beware of making promises, or at any rate, let them think of Dorigen. And so, there's no question that a squire can behave as nobly as a knight. On her bare knees she thanked him, then went home to her husband and told him all, as I've related, and you may be sure he was so well pleased it's impossible for me to describe it. And why should I protract the tale? Averagus and his wife Dorigen lived in perfect happiness for the rest of their lives. Never again was there any difference between them. He cherished her as if she were a queen, and she was true to him evermore. And that's all you'll get from me about these two. Having forfeited his entire capital, Aurelius began to curse the day he was born. "Alas!" he cried, "I wish I'd never promised that astrologer 1,000 pounds weight of pure gold. What shall I do? So far I can see I'm completely ruined. I'll have to sell my inheritance and turn beggar. I cannot live here and bring disgrace to all my kindred in this town, unless I can persuade him to leniency. However, I'll try him with the proposal that I will make him an annual payment on fixed days, and I'll thank him for his great kindness, and I shan't fail to keep my promise." Now with heavy heart he went to his treasure chest and brought gold to the value of 500 pounds, or thereabouts, to the astrologer. Damn, if he's already got 500 pounds kicking around, it means he's loaded. Beseeching him to be generous enough to give him time to pay the remainder. Said he, "Master, I may claim what I've never failed to keep my word as yet. My debt to you will certainly be paid off whatever happen, even if I have to go a-begging in nothing but my jacket. But if you grant me, on security, a respite of 2 or 3 years, then I'll be all right. But otherwise I must sell my heritage, and I can say no more." Hearing these words, the astrologer replied gravely, Have I not kept my bargain with you?" "Yes, indeed, both well and truly." "And have you not enjoyed your lady as you wished?" "No," he answered. "No," and he sighed sadly. "Why not? Tell me the reason if you can." Then Aurelius began his story and told him all as you've already heard, if there's no need to tell it again. Said he, Avaragus in his magnanimity would rather have died in sorrow and distress than that his wife should be false to her pledged word. Also he told him of the grief of Dorigen, how loath she was to be an unfaithful wife, that she would rather have died on the spot than have pledged her word to him in all innocence, never having heard before of magical illusions. This made me take such pity on her, that as freely as he sent her to me, as freely did I send her back to him. That's the sum total of it, and there's no more to say. The philosopher replied, why is he always called something different? The philosopher replied, "Dear friend, each of you behaved nobly to the other. You are a squire, and he is a knight. But God Almighty forbid a scholar should not behave as nobly as any of you. Never fear. Sir, I remit you of your 1,000 pounds, as much as if you have had, but now come into existence, and had never set eyes on me before. Sir, I will not take a penny from you for all my skill, nor anything for my labor. You paid generously for my board, and that is enough. Farewell, and good day to you." And he mounted his horse and went on his way. Now, gentlemen, I'd like to put you to this question. Which of them seems to you the most generous? Tell me before you ride any further. I can do no more. My tale is over. So that's the end of the Franklin's Tale. And maybe we'll play ball for the rest of the stream. So, who is the most generous person in this story? So we got 4 candidates. We have Avaragus, we have Dorigen, we got Aurelius, and we have the magician / astrologer / philosopher / con artist. I don't know. But who is the most generous person? So, just a little bit of catch up. So, I guess we would say Avaragus was generous in that he was willing to give up his wife and let another man, like, basically Avaragus was willing to be a cuck so that his wife would not look stupid for dishonoring her word. So he was generous with his wife. Dorigen was generous with herself, I guess, in being willing to be truthful. with both her husband and Aurelius, even despite her stupidity. Aurelius was generous in that he allowed, even though he technically won their bet, if you will, with Dorigen, he rescinded it. He said, you know what, I'm not going to take what I demanded, even though I won the bet. And the magician was willing to give up the 1,000 pounds that was owed to him. Because he did technically, like, they technically did sign a deal that, like, yeah, I'm gonna do this magic trick for you for 1,000 pounds. Now I know the quick answer people will have is sorry, not Aurelius. Aurelius is a dipshit. I put him at the bottom. Because what Aurelius's quote unquote generosity, his revelation, he should have had it right away, as opposed to like waiting until like Dorigen was basically willing to, submit to him. Aurelius should have seen that quality a lot earlier. I guess he wasn't taught well enough to be a noble. But anyway, it's a toss-up between Averagus, but although more people would be more inclined to think that the magician was the most generous. After all, he did allow a guy out of like a payment, out of money that most people would not see in their lifetime, out of 1,000 pounds. And so the magician allowing, like, basically erasing that deal, that makes him look the most generous. Because after all, his has the highest economic value, by far. Because even, like, with Averagus, which you could make a good case for Averagus, and I would, in a similar boat as Averagus, I guess you could say, I would be like, yeah, I don't know if I could do that, to be honest. I don't know if I would be willing to let myself be a cuck in order for my wife to not look disgraceful by not upholding a word. Although, then again, I'd probably be really mad if my wife said something so stupid, but of course mine isn't, so I don't have to worry. I hope I don't have to worry about something like that in my lifetime. I hope my wife is not going to say something like that. I mean, I guess in reverse would be that, like, she kind of did that with me anyway, so it's kind of... But that's where, like, man, that's got to be mega generous if you're willing to be a cuck, because like hell I would. Yeah, and you wouldn't, most guys would not. Most rational guys would not want to be a cuck just so your wife can look good after, like, doing something incredibly stupid. So that's why, like, once again, I see most people would make the case that the sorcerer would be the most generous person in the story, because he's the one that, like, has legitimate claim to his claim, even though it's only an economic one. But he's willing to be like, you know what, I'm willing to let it go if. And so I think who is the most generous person in the story? Like, that takes... I'm going to put Averagus, because that takes guts that I don't have. And, I'm willing to be honest about it. I don't have the kind of guts Averagus does. To, like, be willing to subjugate himself to that. I'd be like, no, right? Like, I would straight up, like... I'd be willing to, like, kill Aurelius if I was Averagus. I'd be willing to kill Aurelius. No lies to you. I mean, that's how much I love my wife. I'd be willing to kill. To, like, no, you would never disgrace her. If you're going to disgrace my wife, you're dead. That's how I think. I know that's I know some people might think that's an out there thought, but, like, no, not really. If you commit your life to someone like that's how you will think. I would think, like, if I was in Averagus' shoes, I'd be like, no, you're dead. If you're thinking about violating my wife, you're a dead man. That's how it is. I'll be honest. So, that's where, like, from a philosophical standpoint, I'd be willing to say that Averagus would be the most generous person, quote unquote. to be willing to give that up, because that's not something I'd be willing to do. Because once again, the thing about money and like taking like the the magician, even though once again the money comparison, this is why the talking about the money comparison thing was actually kind of important, because once again we're talking about money that, like, if we were to put a modern equivalency to £1,000 in the 11th century, that's like saying like let's say $1,000,000. And if I had like made a contract with someone that, hey, if I did something for you and you paid me, and you were gonna pay me $1,000,000 for it, I'd be like, sweet, right? But let's just say like, oh, you had compassion, that you spared this woman of shame. I'd be willing to drop $1,000,000 for someone else's honor. But I don't think I'd do the same with allowing myself to be embarrassed and let a man have his way with my wife. I don't think I'd be able to do that. So I think I'm going to make the argument that Averagus is the most generous person in the story. Because comparing with myself, that's not a price I'm willing... What Averagus paid is not something I'm willing to pay. Whereas, even though the sorcerer is entitled to a lot of money, I'd be willing to drop that. Even if we put like a highball comparison and say like $1,000,000, I'd be willing to drop $1,000,000 for honor, like the magician does. He drops $1,000,000. He drops basically the equivalent of $1,000,000 for honor, and that's something I'd be willing to do. But I would not be willing to like do what Averagus does, to be honest with you. And so that's why I'm going to take the hot take and say that your Streaming Parson hot take of the week. I think Averagus was the most generous person in the story, because he did something that I myself am not willing to do. I'm not willing to do that myself, and so therefore I think he wins. What are your thoughts? Who do you think is the most generous person in this story? You think the same as me? Yeah, I think most guys would think the same as me, honestly. Because once again, as great as having lots of money is, unless you're like a pure materialist, most people would say that like, no, I'm not gonna be a cuck. Because of course, like that implies something higher than like the material realm. Like your honor, your dignity, your trust. Things that are like not material, but we generally value those things more. Any rational person values those things more than money. And so, yeah, I think, see, at the same time, like, even though I kind of said Streaming Parson hot take, I don't think that, like, at the end of the day, it shouldn't be a hot take. That, like, yeah, Averagus was the most generous person, because he was willing to do something most people would not be willing to do. Because, like, once again, like, the money, let's throw, like, the magician and the money thing. Unless you're, like, a truly greedy scumbag and only think about, like, yourself, most people would be willing to drop that $1,000,000. They would be like, I can live my life without it. For things like honor and pride, I'd be willing to drop $1,000,000. Most rational people would think that way, because things like your pride and honor are worth more. Because think about it, right? Your pride and your honor. Well, let's forget honor for a second. Your pride alone is worth more than any amount of money. And so, even though a solid case could be made that the magician was the most generous person, I think Averagus is the more generous person, because he's willing to do something that the average person not be willing to do, right? Because I know some people might say like, well, pastor, shouldn't you have like higher moral standards? You should be more like, you should be able to do anything as a pastor. I'm like, well, dude, There's a difference between being a pastor and being Christ himself, who I represent. You know, Christ gave his life for the sins of man, something he didn't have to do. See, that's the difference between God and man. And I think there's that element in Averagus that reflects like a godly nature that's not found in people. And so that, I could make that argument. Whereas, like, at the end of the day, I'm just some guy. So there are things that I'm not willing to give up, because that's just part of, you know, you can call that human arrogance, and anyone who claims not to have it, question them. But the human arrogance in me would be like, there are some things I cannot give up. And that's one of them. Certain things like pride and honor. I mean, in a healthy way, of course. There is such a thing as like holding on to bad pride. Because, of course, you know, in the Christian worldview, things like bad pride are things we're supposed to repent of. But, you know, that's its own conversation altogether. But I'm talking about, like, once again, like, think about, like, marriage is a good thing. And it's a God-given gift, and it's not something that should be, like, screwed around with. And so, in Averagus's case, he's willing to, like, even something, like, as special as marriage, he's willing to give that up. Whereas I don't think the average person would be willing to do, especially for something as stupid as, like, you know, having another guy have his way with your wife because she made a silly mistake. Like, no self-respecting man would let that pass. And so, Averagus is the most generous person in the story. That's my take. And I know Alir agrees with me, and I think most people would agree with us. Because once again, as I've said already, that's the rational thing, honestly, if you're not, like, a sociopath. If you're not a sociopath, you probably think the same way as, like, people would think the same way as we do. You would think the same way as I do if you're not a sociopath. That's kind of what I'm getting at. I know that's kind of a pompous, if that was a pompous way of wording that, but, I mean, I like to think that's also true. So, those are my thoughts on that. Anyway, it's basically 6 o'clock, so we're going to end the stream here. Before we end the stream, though, we do have an announcement. I mentioned this last week, but I'm going to say it again, because it's going to be starting this Monday. Starting this Monday, 2 o'clock Pacific time, we are doing game streams again on the channel. I did take a month break after Octopath Traveler 2, because I needed that month break. And we're actually going to replay a game that we've already played on the channel. But one of the appeals of this game, and I remember when this game was being launched, and I'll definitely talk way more about this when we actually start streaming this game again, is triangle strategies and its replayability. Because of the whole, your choices actually matter in this game. So we're going to play that game again and make new choices and see what kind of new story we get. So, starting Monday, June 12th, at 2 o'clock Pacific time, we will be playing Triangle Strategies on the channel again. And so, I hope you guys will definitely check that out. I don't know about New Game Plus. We'll see. The thing for sure is that we're going to make different choices in the game. So, we'll see whether we do New Game Plus or not. I mean, New Game Plus allows me certain characters, so that would be nice. But we'll see. We'll see how we end up doing it. I think I'm kind of hesitant to do it because it's been like a year since I played that game, so maybe playing it fresh again would be kind of nice. And, I'll have more to say about it when Monday comes around. But that's the plan now. We are doing new gaming streams on the channel with Triangle Strategy. We'll be playing that again. And that will be Monday, starting Monday, June 12th at 2 o'clock or 1400 hours Pacific time. And until then, I hope you guys enjoyed the Canterbury Tales. I hope you guys have a great Friday night. I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I will see you guys on Monday. Until then, God bless you, and have a good night.